Good afternoon. Oh, this is going to be really weird. It's loud. Welcome to the last session of the day. You survived. And we only have about 60 slides to go through. Figure 2 minutes a slide. We should make it by 8 o'clock. So, is that okay? Is that okay with everybody? Good. I got a thumbs up in the back. We're golden. We're golden. Welcome. My name is Brian Bowman. I'm a director architect for a company called Archwell Essentials. Archwell Essentials is a managed service provider. From an OpenEdge standpoint, we have one customer that we support. It is one of the top 5 mortgage banks in the United States. Due to corporate policy, I can't state who they are. But if you know anything about the United States, you can probably figure out which one they are. But that's okay. So, but with Archwell Essentials, we are a managed service provider or an MSP. We provide services in monitoring and managing environments for customers. Now, obviously, we have one OpenEdge. We have multiple other services that we provide, including infrastructure. So not only do we have DBAs to manage our environment for you, we also have networking, telephony, and Linux or Unix administrators. We run in AWS, so that's really where we work. From a DBA standpoint or from an OpenEdge standpoint, from an operations standpoint, we have approximately a combined knowledge of 158 years of DBA knowledge. And it's not developers who do a little bit of DBA. These are pure DBAs, and that's what I represent in terms of that team as well. So I manage the team for them. From a migration experience standpoint, we recently have migrated from AWS, recently, I say probably about 3 years ago, from AIX to AWS. So we are 100% on Amazon. Interesting migration from in that environment. We've also, over the last 2 years, migrated from Classic App Server to PASOE. So we have a lot of experience in terms of running PASOE in that environment as well. So, so that's just a little bit about me. From my experience, I've worked with Progress for over 30 years. I've worked with Progress for about 25, 26 years. I've done everything except for legal and accounting. I started in support. I worked with Vladimir, a lot of different people. Worked in Europe for 2 years. I was in development. I was in support. I was in consulting. I was a product manager for the database for a few years. I was also product manager for OpenEdge management and replication, and the product manager for the installation tools. So a lot of different experiences within Progress. And I learned from very early on. So I started in version 6.2L. Some of you guys have probably been working with it longer than I have, but I had the luxury of learning from the people who actually built the product, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So, and on a side note, I'm an avid barbecue addict. And I say it's an addict because I am addicted to it. I have a competitive team called Hot Mess Barbecue, and I also compete with another team of my nephews called 16 Mesh. So anytime you want to talk about barbecue and American barbecue and meat, I'm there. So, and I'm in the process of going through a meat detox. So if I kind of get woozy and pass out, then you'll understand why. Because I had a whole lot of meat this weekend. So anyway, moving forward. So we're going to talk about what does it mean to keep current. We're going to talk briefly about the OpenEdge release layout and versioning. We've all probably been through it, but I wanted to try and set a baseline so that we all had the same understanding of when we talk about updates, what does that really mean. We're going to talk about my environment, what my environment does, what we look like. All of this is from my perspective as a customer like you. Like most of you, you're not all customers, some of you are Progress. So I can identify the green shirts. So, but from my perspective, you know, I've worked inside, I've been inside, I've also seen, so I know something about the internals of the installation process. But I've also worked as a customer. I've had to actually live through doing the process. So that's my perspective. It'll be a little bit different than maybe some of the other things that you see. And I'll go through and talk about what do we do to keep current, and a couple of additional topics in terms of things to look out for, things that we realized that you're probably going to have to deal with as well. So before I start, I'd like to get a feel for understanding of where you are in terms of your releases. So people are currently on 11.7. Okay. 12.2. 12.8. Okay, some of you have already made it to 12.8. That's great. Before 11.7, it's okay. Oh, you don't count. 10.2b, it's a great release. It's like, unfortunately, it's very, very stable, right? It just runs. That's the biggest curse that Progress has. Okay, so talking about releases. Oh, no, hold on a second. So what does keeping current mean? Part of this means you need to catch up. And 12.2 and 12.8, and we saw in John Ainsworth's presentation this morning, right? 11.7 retires in whatever it was, 158 days. So you got to be off. We should be off 11.7 by then, right? Will it still just run? It won't just stop, right? Other tools will just stop. Other products will stop. So Progress won't. OpenEdge won't from that release. And it does hurt. We absolutely have been there. We recognize and acknowledge that it hurts to get caught up to start with. But once you're there, it's a lot easier. It's a lot better to work with it. So planning and using a release landscape really makes it a lot easier to get there. Understanding the integrations or the intricacies between different releases and how can you step through the whole process, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So, and understanding why you need to be current. For us, in our world, security drives everything. So, when there's a security update that comes out, a vulnerability that's announced, we have to go to that release that supports that vulnerability immediately. 12 days ago, I think about 12 days ago, Progress announced that there was a new set of vulnerabilities available for OpenEdge. Right? How many people knew about that? Okay, yes. So they've updated 11.7, 12.2, and 12.8 with updates. So you need to be current on that. We were lucky enough that we were already updating 12.2 to up to 12.2.16, which is the 12.2 release that patches those vulnerabilities. And there were 2 or 3 that fall into that category. So security is critically important to us. So staying current is really part of the reason that we had to catch up. Feature functionality, to be able to take advantage of new things if you can and if they make sense. Sometimes they don't make sense. And then the dreaded support statement. Anybody know what that statement is? Oh, it's fixed in the current release. Well, it doesn't help you whenever you're 5 releases behind or so those are the reasons that you really need to catch up. When I talk about keeping current, from our perspective, it's really running on the latest long-term supported or LTS release, with that being 12.2 or 12.8. One of the things that just happened within the last year is 12.2 release landscape changed a little bit, and 12.2 is not retired for another 5 years, 3 to 5 years. So that helped us change our plans in terms of going to 12.8. We are going to be on 12.8, but we're currently on 12.2. But I get ahead of myself. So, and whenever I say keeping current, I say almost being up to date. Sometimes you don't want to be on the most current release because it hurts. It's that sharp edge. And then obviously keeping current requires testing. Testing your installs as much as you can. We've seen much more recently that updates have been very, very stable, and we haven't had any major issues between updates in the 12.2 environment. So, which is great for us. And that's what Progress touts, right? An update is the current release. So, but if you can afford the risk of staying on the latest and greatest, whether it would before 12.8 came out as the next LTS release, if you could be on 12.2, 12.3, 12.4, 12.5, all the way through that cycle, great, good for you. I'm not in that environment. My business will not let us do that. So we have to live with it. And if you can afford to update every 6 months, that's the same thing, right? Great for you in terms of minor releases. So that's what I talk about when I talk about keeping current. So let's take a quick look at the release landscape overview. Have you guys seen this type of thing before? Does it make sense, ring a bell? Okay, I'm getting some nods. So from my perspective, there are, and I believe this is still correct, there are 3 parts to an OpenEdge release: a major version, a minor version, or an update, formerly called a service pack. So I'll go back and forth in terms of calling those 2 that. Major versions, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I don't know whether Rob Strait talked in his roadmap about 13 being the next release. I'm getting yeses, he did, so 13 is the next release after 12.8. So, and then there's updates. 9.1D, 10.2B, 11.7.20, and 12.2.16 are examples of those. I didn't put the 12.8 one there. So those are updates. When I talk about staying current, everything that I'm talking about is the update process. Okay, and we'll talk about that at the end in terms of the update process of going from an update 12.2.8, 12.2.11, 12.2.14 to 12.2.16. So there's also another level of special installs, debugs, or PUPs, progress and supported patches, that may come across your table at some point in time. You need to talk to, progress is the only one that will direct you to go in that, support. So that's kind of a release explanation, so we're not all on the same baseline. Some hidden things that makes it easier to be able to work in this environment. One is R code compatibility. Within updates, it is touted that the R code is compatible. So I'll tell you, it is touted, and when we went to 12.2.16, we actually found an issue where updating to 12.2.16, there was one piece of R code of our 17,000 programs that didn't run right. We recompiled and everything worked. So I don't know why it was, we don't know why it was, but we found one piece of code that wasn't compatible across the versions, across the updates. So some of the things, process you should have to or should run, things like updating as root. You have to install as root. I guess I just took away my last bullet, didn't I? That's some of the things you have to look for when you're looking at that. Watch out for compatibility issues with other software. If there's other third-party software out there that they have to update, for example, if you're just running a generic Tomcat in your environment, and what happens if your Unix team has to go update the Tomcat for a security patch on Tomcat? Does OpenEdge support that? You got to be worried about that. So those third-party type tools. The other part is there might be other third-party tools that you install on the server or on the clients that need to be current or need to be more current or less current than what the OpenEdge release might be laying down. So you have to worry about that from a configuration standpoint. Most of the time, that's not an issue for you to deal with, but it's just something to look at, something that we've come across as we work through this process. So let's talk about a little bit more detail about our environment. As I had said before, we're running OpenEdge 12.2. We technically have 2 applications that run in our environment: a mortgage origination application and a document management system application. The document management system application is as busy as the mortgage one, but it's almost all web-bot driven, web-driven by requests coming in externally. And it just manages documents. That's all it does. Within those 2 applications, we have 4 environments for them: dev, test, UAT, and prod. Okay? All told, there are 16 databases that we deal with. And that adds to up to about 103 Linux servers that need to be updated from our standpoint in terms of they have OpenEdge installed on them. We have to stay current within 90 days on all 103 of those. So that's what we have to do. About 6,000 users on the larger application. That's really what we're running of. Our database size is between 200 gig, and our largest database is about 3.5 terabytes. 5 years ago, 3.5 terabytes would be really scary. We run it today without even really thinking about it. In fact, we run replication sets, so there's 3 versions of that, and we have 3 other versions 3 other copies of the database that run to support production, that are replicated, that are cloned every night. So we have 6 databases at that 3.5 terabyte size. We run everything as a service account. So we have a special user that runs everything, and that gives us privileges to be able to go do things amongst the machines. And that becomes important because that service account is not root. So you can't, SSH from machine A to machine B as root to go do something. It's probably a security breach, right? It's a real security issue. So we run everything as a specific service account, specific user. That creates some challenges whenever you start doing updates and installs. So, and obviously I already said security patching, critical and paramount to our environment. And it's really what drives a lot of the discussions. Before we got current, we would update the OpenEdge release about every 4 years. So we were well behind. They got to 11.7 when it first came out, and they stayed on it for, I don't know how many years, 7 years, 6 years, something like that. So that's something that's changed, and you have to get your company, your environments to agree to stay current. And the big thing that deals with that is that last bullet. Security is the most important thing that drives that. So we are running AWS Linux 2. We do have a couple of Windows machines which run Windows 11. And some of our clients are Windows clients. Almost all of our clients are actually character clients. They're Chewy clients. And the different lists of products we run the AEE database, Advanced Enterprise Edition database. We run OpenEdge management. We run replication with replication sets. We run PASOE. We run character user interface and GUI interface. We do AI log shipping for disaster recovery to an alternate AWS site, which is in AWS region. In the event that we have a major disaster and Amazon loses the US East region, we can go to Ohio in the US and fail over to that, in theory. That's a whole different challenge. We also run Proto Oracle, and that becomes the single biggest challenge for us when it comes to staying current and applying service packs or updates, so in both environments. So with a CI/CD environment, we deploy changes to the application about every 3 weeks to non-prod. So every 3 weeks we're applying schema. Does anybody go on a faster cycle than that? No. Does anybody never update their schema? Don't you wish? That would make life so much easier. So anyway, so that's a little bit more about our environment and what our environment looks like. So what do we do to keep current? When we update, we install what I call from the outside in. We start at the clients and the PASOE layer. If you consider it to be a bullseye, the database is the center, and then you move the processes outside. We actually, as complex as our environment is, we only have 3 layers. We have the database layer, we have the PASOE layer, and we have the client layer. And that's it. So if you think about it that way, I update my clients first because they can be on a newer release. They're almost all connected client server to the database. Of our 6,000 users, we have about 12 to 14 users who have to connect through shared memory. So they're my last clients, obviously, to update because of the database. So I upgrade the clients, upgrade PASOE, and then upgrade the database finally. So that's what I say about outside in terms of doing updates. When we went from 11.7 to 12.2, we did it the same way. We updated all the clients to a 12.2. We ran parallel sets. Then we did the PASOE instances. And then finally, on the last weekend, we migrated the databases. So the process that we have is wholly scripted. So we can run, there's 4 steps that run into this. There's a setup, and we'll go into these in a little bit more detail. There's a step 1, which is the backup. Step 2, which is actually the installation. And then step 3, which is backing up the new installation. So validation occurs throughout all of these scripts. So we can guarantee that these all worked right, as far as we know, throughout the process, including going and checking for errors that happen in the installation as it runs through the process. We also learned early on that we needed a backup plan. So if an installation failed, how do we recover? That's why we had a backup. Our backup plan takes about 5 minutes to recover, 5 minutes to back everything out. And we don't rely on the progress backup of within the installation. We do our own backup and restore. So that's part of the reason that we do that. Some other things that we have to do to keep current. The corporate goal is to eventually get to the point where we have to reboot our Linux servers every 30 days. So imagine having to reboot everything, all your servers every 30 days. Now we have 103-ish servers. The Unix team has over 600 servers they have to reboot every 30 days. Or that's the goal for them to reboot every 30 days. We're at the point where we're doing about every 90 days. So, but that's part of the update process from an OpenEdge standpoint. We worked with them and determined that, hey, every time we go do an update, we got to shut everything down anyway. Why don't we just reboot the server? So they apply patches as we update, and then we reboot the server, and we have a clean server to run with. We also periodically stop instances and restart instances, so they start up on new hardware in Amazon. Because we have had problems in the last few years where an instance becomes unhealthy, and sometimes we get notice because of the underlying hardware. Sometimes we get notice, sometimes we don't. We've had database servers just automatically reboot themselves. Thank God it wasn't the main production source server. We just bring it back up, start replication, and it resynced and it came back in sync. But it does happen periodically, so just be aware of that. We always try and review updates for any potential issues or challenges, including going through PANS releases. You know, we get a PANS release every day. If you're not on the progress alert notification system, I believe is what PANS stands for, you should go find it and make sure you get on that. Because every day you get a listing of what's changed and what's been reported and what knowledge bases are coming out there. We do have a luxury in our environment in that we get to take a nightly outage to restart everything. So every night we stop everything and restart it. It helps us manage memory. This is a throwback to when they were back on HP, which was before AIX. They had memory problems with specific jobs that ran. The only way they could figure out to solve that problem was to shut everything down and restart it. So that's why we still do it. So someday our goal will be to get to the point where we only reboot once a week, but that introduces other challenges for us. So during our nightly process, you know, we do storage area maintenance. We probably add extents to storage areas about once a week across our environments. We apply schema automatically, depending on the environment. Dev and test, it happens automatically through the night processing. In UAT, because we have Pro 2, that can automatically be done. We scripted 98% of it. There's 1% of it that we can't do. There's one step in the thing that we have to do manually. And I'll talk about that on Friday when I talk about managing and monitoring Pro 2 in your environment. So a non-prod outage is typically 15 to 20 minutes. When we do the update, we add 20 minutes to that. So they already know there's an outage, so they deal with that. From a production standpoint, 20 to 25 minutes. And again, we add another 15 to 20 minutes to that. So that's the outage those are the outages that we do and schedule and work with as the customers for our clients. Make sense so far? Good. So the scripts that we do, the reason I'm going through and talking about these scripts is because when this gets posted out on the PUG challenge, you'll get examples of these scripts. You'll get samples of these scripts that go through and do all this whole process. So you'll actually get to have something that we mostly trust that works, and I'll talk about that in a second, but that you know does all the processes and highlights and covers some of the details. So there's just an update CFG. That's really where you set the whole environment up. One script you change for each release. The upgrade.ini is exactly what it is. It's an INI file to run a progress silent install. That's what it's set up for. There's a setup program that goes out and untars the installation, sets up the passage, copies the instances.unix file from the DLC install directory so that we know what PASOE instances are on the server, because an update goes out and updates PASOE instances as well. So if there's things that change in terms of security and permissions in a PASOE update, you have to be able to go deal with that. And that's one of the gotchas that we caught when we went and started working through this. And then it verifies everything to make sure that everything's available for the rest of the steps to work. The first script backs up DLC and backs up the PASOE instances so that we can recover from it. That's all it does. And then it verifies those backups. Step 2 applies the update. We actually do the silent install. It validates the update. And then it does any custom configurations. Remember, I just talked about the fact that we update PASOE. Well, we run PASOE as MLS, or as a service account. It's called MLS. By doing that, when you run an update, it changes the permissions to some of the underlying files in the PASOE Catalina Home instances configuration. So we had to go figure out what those were and go fix that. So you, in your environment, may have a similar thing. The only way to figure that out is to go set up a server and do it and then update it and go see if you can find those details. So that's one thing that we absolutely know. The other thing that we change is that we go out from a tailoring standpoint, from our standpoint, is we go out and we run multiple secondary brokers for our databases. We actually create, depending on the environment, either a symbolic link to the _mproserve or mtproserve, or the _pro APSV or the _ progress, so that we can identify what clients are running which part of the secondary broker application from the OS level within processes. So that's part of the other customization that we do under the covers. And then step 3 makes a backup of that post configuration for DR purposes. We didn't start doing this until recently when we realized that, well, we lost a machine. We didn't lose a machine, we lost a drive on the machine. And so this helped us. We realized we didn't have a backup of the installation. So we had to go back to the previous one, run step 1, step 2, and then and then go recreate it to reapply the update. So that's why we did that. The only other one that we have are backup scripts. And again, this restores the DLC environment. It restores the PASOE environment, the PASOE instances. And then it undoes, make sure it goes out and undoes some other processing to make sure that they're all consistent and current. So that's what our scripts look like from that standpoint. So some additional topics, things that we realize and understand. This whole process, even though I'm talking about working for an update, it can work for a regular install as well. As you're upgrading, if you're going from 11.7 to 12.2, and you have 60 odd servers, 103 odd servers you have to go update, these scripts would work just as well with that than any update. Now your upgrade.ini file will change because you have to list control files or your serial numbers and control codes inside of it. So that's part of what would change in the installation, but that's easy enough to go figure out. Well, when I say it's easy enough to go figure out, there's not a good example of what that INI file looks like in the progress environment. You can go search for it and you'll find it eventually, but there's not a really easy, good example of that. That's why the upgrade.ini that I have, at least from an update standpoint, would work. So going from 11.7 to 12.2 to 12.8, that's the type of stuff that you need to think about, to worry about. So second one, sometimes being on the bleeding edge hurts. What I mean by this is, if you're going to stay current and stay really, really current, like when 12.2.17 comes out, that week I'm going to start the installation on it. If you have to do that, then you have to live with it. If you have the luxury of saying, we're going to start with this, and it may have a bug, or an undocumented feature, that may happen. So you have to worry about that. So it could be bleeding edge. Just understand that you might have to bleed whenever you go through that. Yeah, Tom? Good question. The question is, do you update dev, test, UNT, UAT, and prod in that order, or do we just go across the board and do all of them at the same time? The order we actually do it is test, dev, UAT, and prod. And we tend to go through test, and we'll let test sit for 3 or 4 days before we start the next one. And remember, we have 2 environments. So we'll do test for UAT, test for application 1 and application 2, maybe in the same week, so that we can make sure that we work through that. The reason that we do test first is because our development environment is, next to production, our most complicated environment to work with. So we have extra databases that run in our development environment, and there's an extra very small application that we work with whenever we're doing that. So that's why we don't do dev first. The other part of that is dev is where there are more users working in the non-prod environments. Our UAT environment is probably our quietest environment. So the other advantage of doing test first is that it gets the most activity. Our second largest database is our test database, not our UAT database. So that's part of the reason also that we do tests. We feel much more stable, feeling that test is going to be the first one to cause a problem, to show us a problem in our environment as we work through it. So a good question. We do test first, then dev, then UAT. We'd like to leave 2-ish weeks between UAT and prod, just to make sure there's nothing that causes a problem. So just from a safety standpoint and a scheduling standpoint, our scheduling works out from that perspective. So secure CRT. We use secure CRT a lot, and it can be your best friend or your worst nightmare. Secure CRT for us, for anybody, has the ability for you to go open up 5 windows, 10 windows, 15 windows, and you can type 1 command in and run it on all of those windows. Sounds really cool, yeah? Well, guess what? What do I have to do? I have to install as root, which means I got to log in to 15 windows as root and have root access on all those windows open at the same time. Well, that means if I do an rm-rf space /dot instead of /, guess what? I just deleted 15 machines instead of 1. So if I run the wrong command and I'm not paying attention, so that's why it's your worst nightmare. Now on the flip side of that, if we're doing this type of an update, we've gotten to the point where my offshore guys can go open up all the character client servers, get them all set up, and they click 1 button, and it does the update for all 5 of those at the same time. Part of the reason that we went with step 1, step 2, and step 3, and not build them all together, because I could just script them all together, run through the whole thing, is because we have done this 200 plus times. We still don't trust completely that it works right. And in fact, this last time we had a problem, and I hope I called it out. I'm going into my next slide. I'll get to that in a second. We'll come back to that in just a minute. So make sure you have compatible installations. You know, you can run 12.2 or 12.8 clients with 12.2 or 11.7 databases. So you don't have to do the whole environment in one shot. Break it up and chunk it into pieces. That's what when we realized that made it so much easier for us to go from 11.7 to 12.2, because we had the clients updated for a month before we did PASOE, and PASOE was running on 12.2 for a month before we ever had to do the databases. So it makes it a lot easier. It makes it feel like you're not you're eating the elephant one bite at a time instead of having to eat the whole elephant at once. So that's really important. And again, I told you the sample scripts are available for you. So all the scripts I talked about, you can get access to. So this is our example of our schedule. We tend to update during our night processing. For non-prod, it happens at 9:30 or 9 o'clock at night. Twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And it happens during our night processing. We have a semaphore, a file we put out there, and it just stops it for night processing. Our Unix guys are online. We work together to do it. do that all together. We do 5 to 10 servers per night, and that gets us through all of our servers, with the exception of the database, within 3 weeks. Basically, that's the time that we're looking for. We do the databases last. The databases happen in their own non-prod night processing. Obviously, when you're going from 11.7 to 12, you have to do an update database. So there's additional things you need to take into account as you're going through that process. But regular updates flies through. So it's easy to do. In production, we do our infrastructure. We do it during our infrastructure weekends. Once a month, we have to take an outage to apply schema to production and the application. So that's when we do that from a database standpoint. So we all schedule anything leading up to that weekend, so that weekend is the work gets done. So typically, all of our processes, our updates happening within 20 minutes. Again, we validate through each of the processes to make sure that it all works right. And we can complete this whole process in 4 weeks for our databases. So if Progress were to come out with an update every month, we could stay current with that. Right now, Progress's goal for 12.2 is to do an update every 4 months. So that's what they tell us. For 12.2, for 12.8, I believe it's every 3 months. And for 11.7, don't even ask, I don't even know. So that's really what our schedule looks like from a nightly processing standpoint. So to kind of give you a bit of a summary, it's in our best interest for us to stay relatively current. As I said, we're not on 12.8. Part of the reason that we're not on 12.8 is because we have this little problem called AWS Linux 2023. We are on Amazon Linux 2. How many people are in Amazon running? Almost nobody. Okay, that's cool. We're running on Amazon Linux 2. It retires next June. Retires, like goes out of service next June. No more support. So we have to upgrade to 2023. Well, upgrading the OS to 2023 for Amazon is not an update. It is a replace the server with a brand new server. So we have to take all 103 of those servers and migrate the application to new servers. So it's just like migrating from AIX to Linux. Well, it's not the same, obviously, because it's Linux to Linux, right? But that's the concept. When we started working and planning out this project, one of the things we realized was that 12.8 is supported with AWS Linux 2023. 12.2 isn't. So do we upgrade to 2020? Do we upgrade to 12.8 and then upgrade to Linux 2023? Well, we couldn't do that because 12.8 isn't supported with Amazon Linux 2. So now we're stuck. So we worked with Progress to say, look, we got to figure this out because 12.2 is going to be supported for the next 3 to 5 years. And they just came back this last week and said that 12.2 has been certified with 2023. So we're going to stay on 12.2 through 2023, through AWS Linux 2023, and then we're going to, at the end of next year, update to 12.8. And we're going to use this process to update to 12.8 throughout that whole process. So that's part of the challenge that we have in staying relatively current. You know, and we don't want, that's part of the reason we're not on 12.8, and we don't want to stay so current that we're on the potential bleeding edge, especially with new development. So this can be 98% automated. You know, like I said, we've run this over 200 times. We still don't quite trust it. You know, it works good. Our validation works. It's pointed out problems, pointed to issues. Probably the biggest single problem we have as we go through this process is every single script we have goes out and checks and makes sure there's nothing in DLC. No process is running because the installation can't run if those processes aren't running. Well, we've been trying to get we're still running an admin server. Because we run OpenEdge management, there's this little undocumented feature that if you don't have the admin server running, the DB agent won't start up. So it relies on the admin server being out there. So we still have to run the admin server. Even though we've moved completely off a classic app server, We don't run web speed. We don't run, obviously we're in 12.2, right? We can't run any of that stuff. So there's no reason other than this to have the admin server process out there. So we're still working through the scripting for that, and that's causes problems for us. So we've finally figured out how we're going to script and solve that problem. So, and we think that we just, since it's an update to the core technology that we need, that we have to have stable to run, we believe that we need to have somebody check that manually as we go through the steps at this point. At some point in time, we may get to the point where we can automate the whole thing, which would be really good because especially with the Unix team rebooting, then we don't even need to get involved. We just stop night processing in our night processing scripts, we run the update, and then we inform Unix they can reboot the server, and they reboot it, and we bring it back up like normal. So that's our goal. And with that, I will open it up for any questions or thoughts or comments that you guys have. You guys have all worked, I know almost all of you, you've worked with Progress for long enough that you've gone through some of this process. So, yes?
What was that proto-Oracle problem you were mentioning?
Proto-Oracle. I'll talk about it now. When you run Proto-Oracle, there are 5 databases you have to keep in sync in terms of the schema for them in a wide area network or a WAN configuration. We've scripted and automated the whole process. There's one step in there. We run Proto-Oracle. There's one step in there where when you apply the schema to the database, apply a DF to the schema holder database, which is the Oracle Data Server Database schema holder. If, well, we have dates. Everybody has a date time format. There's no way to check that box in the UI to say, I'm going to make this an OpenEdge date time by default. So by default, it says, I'm going to take your date time field and in Oracle, make it a date field and a time field. Well, that breaks Proto-Oracle. So we have to stop in the middle of the process, manually go drop the tables, add the tables, do the work there, and then continue on with the automated part of the process. That's the feature that is out there. It's tough from that perspective because if it wasn't for that, literally, it wasn't for us going through that, we could automate the whole thing. And we do. I said we do schema updates every 3 weeks, right? For Proto-Oracle, that means that we update the Oracle database, and we update Pro2 every 3 weeks in non-prod. And starting in January of 2025, that moves to every 2 weeks. So we will update the database every 2 weeks with a schema, probably with a schema. It's not guaranteed, but it's pretty close. And that's because our company has moved to the Agile Scrum methodology. So they're in 3 week sprints now, and they're going to 2 week sprints. So getting them to do that. And we've gone through with them and customized our CI/CD configuration environment working with them where it's all automated, where they have a schema and they use Jenkins to deploy it, to schedule it for the night processing. And in dev and test, it automatically picks that up and applies that schema for us. And then my offshore guys validate the change after it's come up. But with Pro2, you can't do that in UAT and prod. So it has to stop in the middle of it. Yeah?
You mentioned some backups which are created during the upgrade and all that.
Yes.
For how long do you keep them, or how do you manage?
It's interesting you should ask that. We just went from 12.2.9 to 12.2.11 to 12.2.14 to 12.2.16. And one of my DBAs came and said, do we really need this 12.2.11 backup? I'm like, no, we can actually delete the 12.2.14 one too. So we keep them too long. I would say keep them until you're all the way through the process, and you don't have to fail back the whole environment. But then they're of no value. So the other part of that is we do nightly backups with a tool called Commvault. So technically, we could go back to Commvault and restore yesterday's, and I think we keep 7 days worth of Commvault stuff. Actually, we keep more than that. I don't remember how much. So anyway, so we could technically just go clean it all up. So I think what we're going to do is modify our scripts to say, when we go to 12.2.17, we're going to go clean up the 12.2.16 backups. So that's absolutely makes sense. And we tend to be too conservative when we're trying to be that way. Yeah.
What about Docker?
What about Docker? What about containers? We have the luxury and the curse of not running in containers yet. So we don't have to worry about that. We do want to get there. And in fact, when we started down the PASOE route, the architects that started playing with it in our enterprise architecture team, they went all containers for PASOE. And we're like, yeah, I'm sorry, you can't do that because we can't even spell container. So from an operational standpoint, they're like, oh, it just works. Like, no, it doesn't. Not in operations, not in production. So we want to go to containers, and we will go to. Eventually, we'll get to containers for PASOE. We won't get to containers for the character clients, the Chewy clients, just because we think there's too much heavy weight there. I mean, we're pushing 700 clients through a Linux instance. So I don't feel safe trusting that. Database, never. So, and I absolutely will never go to the database in a container environment. PASOE makes sense. And scalability, be able to spawn up another one. And because we have, in our production environment today, we have 4 PASOE servers. And those 4 servers, support our whole environment. Well, if we have to go add a 6th, in fact, we're in the process of adding a 5th and 6th, it takes us a day, and it only takes us a day, effectively, to get a 5th instance up and running so that we can add that into our load balancer environment. But if we had containers for it, in theory, we should just go click, and it would spawn up another container. And it would scale up and scale down based on what we really need.
Yeah, I just don't know how it works then with the licenses, the Progress license.
So from a Progress licensing standpoint, from my view, I don't work for Progress anymore, so I have the luxury of saying this. It shouldn't make any difference if you're licensed to be able to support them. You have to have enough licenses. You couldn't spawn 20 PASOE containers, each one being full, without having the licenses to support it. So you have to have the licenses to be able to support it in general.
But that wouldn't be a problem.
No, from that configuration, as long as you have the licensing, it shouldn't be a problem. Now, I'll defer to the Progress people to absolutely correct that. So,
another question: have I heard correctly that as of 12.8.4, you cannot do silent installing?
I have no idea on that. You're bursting my bubble. You're killing me. So I will have to go verify that. So that's interesting. That is really is.
It's incremental now.
Yeah.
It doesn't work silently.
No, but that's what I've heard. It's so simple.
Sorry,
What's the question?
So I'm sorry. So the question was, he's heard that as of 12.8.4, the silent install no longer works.
Is that a feature or a bug?
That's a good question.
I asked Progress, and they suggested I should enter
An enhancement request.
an enhancement request.
Yeah.
So it's a feature.
Really?
Yeah.
So I'll check on that, and if that's the case, then we'll lobby to have that repaired. I know we call that an undocumented feature because you have to be able to. You should be able to do it, especially. Right. Exactly. It's just an update, and obviously we're in Linux, right? Well, in Windows, you got to be able to do a silent install, silent update, because that's the way all Windows machines are running these days, is with updates. Integration with the whole Windows infrastructure to manage it. Whether that's good or bad is a whole different discussion. But the other advantage, backing up a second back to your containers, the other advantage that we see with containers is that I can just replace the container with a new container, and when they go down and come back up, it comes up with the new environment. There's a lot of value there, exactly. So, any other questions? I'm taking all your time for relaxing, getting ready to drink tonight. So, all right, you have my contact information. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm around for the rest of the week, of course, as well. So, thank you very much.